Hello, everyone. I wanted to do a video in which I give you kind of an overview of what we're doing in part three of the course. You'll see that part three is called Modern Moral Philosophy, Foundations for Moral Choice. And as you see, the two authors that we'll be dealing with are Kant, Immanuel Kant, who was a German philosopher of the 18th century, and then John Stuart Mill, who was a British philosopher of the 19th century. And they are both quite important for modern moral philosophy. And, if you're a little bit bemused at calling the philosophy of an 18th century German philosopher and a 19th century British philosopher modern moral philosophy, then I think you're quite right to be bemused because it doesn't seem very modern. It was hundreds of years ago. But if we think about the way that Western history, at least, is sort of divided up into ancient, medieval, and modern, the modern period is usually thought to begin in about after the Renaissance. So maybe 16th and 17th century, wherever you want to date it, is sort of the beginning of the modern. It's a very loose thing. So modern moral philosophy is really the philosophy that developed in the post-medieval world, the world of the Middle Ages in Europe and then in America. So what are we talking about here? Let me do a little writing, a little note-taking using an open tab. I call this Foundations for Moral Choice. And this is meant to be distinguished from what we were doing with Plato and Aristotle, or what I think Plato and Aristotle were doing, which is not giving us the foundations for moral choice. But what were they doing? I would say they were reflecting on the good life. The good life meaning, just in the general way, what would a good human life be? What would be a good way to live your life? And both of them were very much concerned with virtue and getting the virtues. I said, that this was kind of the beginning of moral philosophy, which is just thinking about morality itself. And so even though the Greeks, Plato and Aristotle, did it differently than Kant and Mill will do it, they're all doing that. That is, I would say they're all doing moral philosophy as opposed to what the writers of the Bible were doing, which is not reflecting on morality itself, but just sort of telling you what was right and wrong, which is a different sort of thing, as we saw. So let me just explain this foundations for moral choice and what I mean by that, foundations for moral choice, is that each of these authors, Mill and Kant, want to give you a giving you a basis for deciding between right and wrong actions in any given situation in which moral choice is called for. I don't think that Plato was interested in that at all. I think maybe Aristotle could be fit into that a little bit more easily in what he was doing in the Ethics, but not in any sort of direct way. So what we can regard Kant and Mill as doing is giving us a framework for moral decision making, kind of an algorithm, kind of a method. Again, not in terms of how you're supposed to live your whole life, which is what Aristotle was about, but what to do in this situation. So could say that what they're interested in doing is giving us a foundation, a basis, a method for making such a choice in a particular situation. And that is something that distinguishes them, I think, very distinctly, very firmly from what Plato and Aristotle were up to. So we'll be using terms. I'll be using terms: Kantianism and utilitarianism, which is always hard to type because there's so many I's. By Kantianism, I just mean the moral philosophy of Kant. By utilitarianism, that's a little bit of a different sort of term because Mill was not the only, or by any means even the first, utilitarian. I would say that utilitarianism is any moral philosophy that says that the best action, that is, the best choice to make in any given situation in which a moral choice is demanded, is always the one which results in the greatest possible amount of human happiness. So there's nothing called Millianism or Millism, because John Stuart Mill was part of a school of philosophers who were either called themselves utilitarians or before a certain point were recognizably utilitarian, even though that term had not yet been coined. So, as we'll see, Kantianism and utilitarianism are utterly, in my opinion, incompatible. They are two absolutely different ways of characterizing what the foundations or basis of morality is. What I've put above as being the definition of utilitarianism is basically one that Mill says rests upon the greatest happiness principle. And that's the foundation that's being offered. And what Kant offers is rather more, at least at first, more difficult to understand. Is one based upon his categorical imperatives, and we'll spend a lot of time. But basically that that there are a few moral rules, and we'll see what they are. No need to get into them now, that must be followed in all situations. That's the categorical part, irrespective of consequences. So if we see right away that if utilitarianism is saying that the choice should be dictated by the results, and Kant is saying that the moral thing to do is always one that's irrespective of consequences, and we see right there that they are incompatible. So that's what we'll be looking into, a different approach to moral philosophy than Plato and Aristotle, one that is much more, I don't know how to say it, well, I would say much more directed towards giving a foundation for moral judgment or moral choice that could be used in any particular situation, rather than the more comprehensive view of Aristotle or the open inquiry into the nature of morality that Plato gave us in the Meno.